So then I went to the section of the bill that prescribes how this will be enforced. The Secretary of Health and Human Services is empowered to determine which medical providers, doctors, and hospitals are, quote, meaningful users of this system and therefore in compliance. And the HHS Secretary is also authorized to use increasingly stringent measures, that's the language in the bill, to enforce compliance. Okay. It's this toughness and vagueness.
Okay, I mean, look, George Washington said that government is brute force, and that's what it seems to me we have coming.
Well, that was from February of 2009. Former Lieutenant Governor of New York, Betsy McCaughey, went on the Glenn Beck Show to warn about some health care provisions in the stimulus bill. Months later, she went through the massive first draft of what would become the health care overhaul law and sent an even louder message warning about what it meant for every American. Before long, she was coming under serious attack.
The elephant in the room here is that all these bills are devastating care for seniors, and the Baucus bill is the deadliest of all.
You want to scare seniors because that's your business. But Dylan's
provide cost and quality guidelines that will tie the hands of doctors.
So let's talk about seniors. I'm going to make the point to the audience that you did not acknowledge or deliver an answer to my question.
You're not a very fair moderator.
Well, you're not a very fair answerer. So there you go. Okay, takes one to know one.
She is the typhoid Mary of the deathers scourge. She is the angel of deathers.
Joining me now, former Lieutenant Governor Betsy McCaughey. She was former Lieutenant Governor of New York and author of the Obama Health Law and what it says and how to overturn it. Lieutenant Governor, thank you very much for being here. We appreciate it. That really takes us back. I mean, I remember being on America's Newsroom with Bill Hemmer when we had you on, and you were sounding some of these alarm bells well before the town halls, well before the American public really got tuned in to what was in the then bill and started raising concerns about it. Some of the concerns you raised were debunked. Others have been proven true. Where do you think we stand now as we await a Supreme Court hearing on the constitutionality of the heart of this law, the individual mandate?
Well, we are heading toward a constitutional showdown next week in the United States Supreme Court, and this is probably the most important case, certainly one of the most important cases of our lifetimes, because it will determine the relationship between government and the individual. First of all, if government can force all of us to purchase health insurance, government could force us to purchase cars to prop up Detroit, or stocks and bonds to prop up Wall Street. There's no limiting principle. There's no way to stop the federal government from forcing us to do things or buy things to solve many other social problems. And secondly, this big law does much more than just force you to buy an insurance policy. For the first time in history, it empowers the federal government to dictate how doctors treat privately insured patients, people in Aetna and Cigna who paid for their plan themselves. The law specifically says that insurers can pay only the doctors who obey whatever regulations the federal government imposes in the name of quality. And that could cover whether your cardiologist chooses to recommend a stent versus a bypass, or when your OBGYN does a
Let me jump in, because you warned back in July, this is July 24th, 2009 in the New York Post, and you wrote a piece called Deadly Doctors. And you wrote as follows: the health bills coming out of Congress would put the decisions about your care in the hands of presidential appointees. And you went on in this piece to say no one is leveling with the public about the dangerous views of the folks who are behind this law. Do you still feel that that's the case? Do you feel that that's how things wound up under the health care law?
Absolutely. Here is the final product, and Section 1311 of this law specifically states that doctors must obey the regulations, and there's no limit on what they are, imposed by the federal government, the Secretary of Health and Human Services. I outlined some of the decisions that could be made by the Secretary. Basically, your doctor's decisions will be monitored for compliance with federal guidelines, and your doctor may have to choose between doing what's right for you and staying in the government's good graces.
How do you see the stakes as we go into next week? I mean, this is it. All along we've been saying the Supreme Court's going to take it up eventually, all these differing lower court decisions. Now finally it makes its way up to the Supreme Court, taking a look at the individual mandate. How do you see the stakes of this decision and this argument?
Well, I'm reasonably confident in a victory, not because, as so many are, I've been parsing the justices' previous decisions, although that's always interesting, but because the stakes are so high, because liberty here is at stake. It goes way beyond health care. I want to make sure that everyone in the nation has good health care and access to health care, but there are ways to do it without lowering the standard of care and putting government in charge of everyone's care and taking away something as precious as life itself, our liberty.
You are one of the most vocal opponents of this law, and you know, we're not shy about expressing your opinion, even though you took a lot of incoming in some contentious battles. How do you think, I want to ask you before you go, because you started a lot. You started a lot of people's attention on this. How do you think the war was lost? How do you think it got to the point where this law was passed over the objection of so many Americans?
That's right, but though it hasn't been lost. First of all, public opinion is as against this law as the day it was signed into law. So of course the stakes are very high as the Supreme Court hears oral arguments next week and renders a decision likely in June. But the American public has a second chance to get rid of this law, and that is in November. So if the court doesn't strike it down, I'm reasonably confident that the electorate will.
Okay, I'll leave it at that. Ma'am, thank you so much for coming back on. We appreciate it. All the best.